Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a little bit of a chat about some recent 5-star reads that I have absolutely loved. So it's been a while since we've had kind of a catch up on where I'm at with reading. I know I've just posted a video about my kind of currently reading TBR situation and what I'm looking forward to reading next. But it feels like ages since I've just sat down and done a video and talked about books that I really like, or books that I've just finished and really like, and kind of like being able to gush about books that I enjoy and kind of hear what you guys think. I feel like I'm a little bit rusty to making videos, and I know kind of in the gap since I have stopped making videos more regularly, I know that Instagram is a huge thing and I don't even know how to use some of the really good tricks and trades that people use on Instagram for all the kind of gimmicky little clips and stuff, but I love them and I like binge watch them, where people are like 10 books I've loved right now, my last 5-star reads, and like wintry themed ones and autumn ones and Christmas ones, and I'd love to be able to get into that. So that is like a long-term goal, maybe for next year, to try and get better at doing the kind of videos and reels. But I just want to talk about some great books that I have read recently, so I'm just going to crack on with some recent 5-star reads. So the first one is Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. So I have read the Pine series by Blake Crouch and I absolutely loved that. It's kind of like a sci-fi dystopian series about a group of people who seem to be the last kind of community on Earth, and we have to kind of figure out what's going on. Really good. I know it's been made into an actual series that I've never kind of been able to watch, but I just thought that was incredible. So I have been told by so many people that they adore Blake Crouch, so I was like, I'll start with his other sci-fi books and see, because I'm not really a sci-fi girly. And obviously the hype that Blake Crouch gets, I was really interested in checking him out, and I was pleasantly surprised by the Pine series. So I kind of felt like I wanted to give him a go again. And I was not disappointed. So Dark Matter has... It's so cleverly written that it's really stayed with me since finishing it. So I finished it in September. And I still think about it all the time. So this story follows Jason, and it has a really strange, like straight into the drama start. So Jason's like with his family, with his son and his wife, and he kind of decides to go out on a works do that he was putting off going to. And I don't want to spoil it too much, and I won't go much further than this, but then he kind of ends up getting kidnapped, and then the world building starts from there, so I don't want to ruin it. But obviously most people know the concept of there is loads of different dimensions of Jason's life. I'm going to say this, I'm going to be really rubbish explaining this because so many people will say it so much more eloquently than me. But essentially he kind of learns that there's so many different alternative Jasons out in the world who made different choices at different paths in his life, and they carried on their life in that lane. And it was so cleverly written and it absolutely blew my mind. But one thing that I think is really clever with Blake Crouch is he creates characters that you really invest in. For someone who's not a sci-fi person, the sci-fi loses any kind of potency for me if I don't care about the characters. Whereas in these stories that he creates, you do. So Jason is a character that you really invest in, and it pulls at your heartstrings because it has paths where he could have gone down that route, and then seeing where that route ends, and then the route he's ended up with. And basically it's kind of a really philosophical story on the musings of, if we had another chance at a different path, would we take it? And are we appreciative of the path that we're currently on? Because it could have gone a different way. There's so many like bits in it where he meets his wife in these alternative lives in different circumstances, but it really pulled at your heartstrings because you invested in their relationship and his relationship with his son. So like there was a couple of times in this book where it like just kept re-breaking my heart, and I did not see that coming. So hopefully I haven't spoiled it too much, but it's just so clever. Afterwards I was just sat there thinking about it, and I was thinking about, yeah, all the possible paths that you could have taken and what that means, and how do we appreciate where we are, and how do we not take the people in our lives for granted and our life for granted. Absolutely mind blown, but also the plot was just so clever. Like there was no loophole in this. There was no point where you were like, well, that makes absolutely no sense. Like I was reading it all the way along being like, oh my god, that's so clever. Okay, that makes sense with that now. Like, oh right, okay, so that's why you did that. You know, it was one of them where you just had more and more respect for the craft of writing this book as you got further along. So I would highly recommend reading this book. I would highly recommend the Pine series as well. I do think at one point I'll want to reread them because I love them so much. And I'm definitely going to read more by Blake Crouch because he's got another few books. Recursion, forgot the other one, but yeah, there's quite a few that are also really highly rated, and I want to get to those. So yeah, the next 3 books kind of, I feel like, have a little bit of a kind of similar theme. I kind of felt as I finished reading them, because I read them actually back to back, that it felt a little bit like, wow, these are kind of similar themes, similar settings. They kind of, even though they are different, technically different genres, they kind of come under the same umbrella for me. I don't know how to explain it, but I'll just go through the books and then hopefully I'll be able to kind of explain that. So I finally got round to reading Brother by Anya Alborn, and this book still haunts me. To this day, I finished it in October. We're now towards the end of November, and this is the definition of a book that kind of grabs you by the throat. And it's very clever because, so obviously it goes without saying I gave it 5 stars. This whole video is about 5-star books. The first 50% is very slow in terms of like it's giving you character development. I almost remember reading the first half and I was like thinking in my head, you know, people say this is such a disturbing book, and you know, maybe I'm harder than I thought because I don't really get that. You know, it's a disturbing background and setup, but we're just getting character development. Nothing kind of too bad is happening yet. Then after the 50% mark, you get confronted with some of the more intense bits of the book, and because you've invested in the character, it kind of goes deeper for you. It cuts deeper. So this follows Michael, if I remember correctly. I just keep looking down because I've got my little book journals as kind of helping me remember. I think it's the 70s. And Michael ends up being adopted into the Morrow family, who are unconventional to say the least because they are serial killers and they are cannibals. And the main crux of this story is explaining how Michael became part of this family and talking about his entrapment within the family. Some of the family members are incredibly disturbing and scary, but Michael has this nuance to him that he's in a really bad situation, but he's not a bad person. But this kind of builds to a point where he's at a crossroads and he has to decide what to do. Whether to kind of keep supporting the family or to try and find a way out. This book, again, like Blake Crouch completely broke my heart. I wanted to pull Michael out the book. Some really dark things happen in the book, some disturbing things. The ending was great, and the reason that I think the ending was great is because it didn't do that stupid thing of either cutting it off too quickly or giving us more of a Hollywood ending. It decided to be true to the story, and I really appreciate that, because like with so many thrillers, for example, they cop out of it at the end and they give you a very meh ending, and this was one where as a reader you actually don't want the ending, but the ending was perfect to me. So it did that last bit of heartbreak. So I hope that hasn't spoiled that too much, and I hope I haven't spoiled the book, but I think everybody knows that it's about a guy's experience living with cannibals and serial killers. And I think this ties in really well to another 5-star read that I read, which is called Postmortem, and this was written by Courtney Lund O'Neill, and it's called, and the subtitle is What Survives the John Wayne Gacy Murders. And so basically I feel like these had a lot of overarching themes, because Brother is a fiction and Postmortem was a non-fiction. So I was given an eARC NetGalley copy to review. And so Courtney is the daughter of Kim Byers, who she was really fundamental in the John Wayne Gacy case, because she was friends and work colleagues with one of his victims, Robert Peist, or Peist, I don't know how you say his name. And so she is infamous for, on the day he goes missing and he follows John Wayne Gacy in his car for a job opportunity, Kim had photos she wanted to develop from her prom, and she got the kind of cartridge slash receipt thing, stump, and she was wearing Robert's coat at the time to keep warm, or jacket, and she popped it in there, and she said even looking back she doesn't know why, just something compelled her to do that. He took that coat, he went to John Wayne Gacy's house, and then when the police ended up going to John Wayne Gacy's house when they had suspicions about him, it was found in his house, which then could connect him to Robert and his disappearance, and then it kind of led to the horrendous investigation of John Wayne Gacy's house, which then, when they started digging around the house, they actually found bodies on his property, in his house, and eventually helped kind of get him convicted. Kim Byers ended up having to testify. She was kind of a star witness. But what's really interesting about Postmortem is so unique in the true crime genre, for the fact that it investigates from Courtney's perspective how Robert Peist's disappearance and him being a victim of John Wayne Gacy, and how that impacted on Kim as she was a teenager at the time. It was in a very close-knit community, how it affected her identity, and then also how Courtney has inherited that trauma from her mother, and how it's impacted on her ability to be a mother and to have relationships, and how she's talking about kind of inherited trauma. So she does reference a lot that she's spoken to her mum, and her mum has helped with her collating this information. It was very important at the beginning that Courtney referenced that this particular true crime book wasn't really going to be about John Wayne Gacy or too much about the actual crimes themselves, but was going to be about sketching in who the victims were, putting them in context, and how there's been a big wave in the true crime genre of emphasising more about the victims, their lives, and focusing less on the infamous serial killers. So I thought this was really, really well done. I think it connects to Brother to me because I feel like it has that serial killer link, and I also think it has that 70s American vibe in the background, kind of close-knit communities, and I feel like the family in Brother could have been just another one like John Wayne Gacy at that time period, where there was kind of the 70s was a bit of an insurgence of serial killers in the US. Don't ask me why. I haven't done enough research to provide an answer on that, but so they feel really connected even though they're completely different genres and styles, but they felt like a companion piece to each other, weirdly. But yeah, so I found Courtney's description of how her mum dealt with it as a teenager and how she dealt with it in adult life and her overcautiousness, and she kind of had a boyfriend at the time who's weirdly kind of like a legend in their family because he was so connected to Kim for such a long time, and she didn't end up marrying him. They broke up and she married Courtney's father, but he is a really fundamental character. So when Courtney meets him in the book, it's really interesting because she's like, you know, you are legendary in our house, we know all about you, Mum's told us all about you. And Courtney references how she never knew the Peasts, but Kim spent so much time after Robert's disappearance there that they also feel like Courtney feels like she knew or has an emotional connection to Robert's mother, even though she never met her, because she's so connected to her mother's story. The inherited trauma bits were really interesting. It was just so compulsively readable and such an interesting take. It really blew me away. I didn't actually want to put the book down. So I would highly, highly recommend. I think it has come out recently. I will get a bit better once I'm making more videos. I will kind of pop up when their publication date is so that I can actually be better at that. But I'm pretty sure, I'll write anything down in the comments if I remember, but Post-Mortem I think has come out. But really phenomenal and really worth a read. And really interestingly, the cover art looks a bit basic to me, so I feel like it's a book that people might bypass because it doesn't look, I don't know, it sounds horrible, but the cover art doesn't look very professional to me. So I think people might think it's a bit naff. I don't know how to say that nicely, but it's really worth reading. And if you liked Brother, I think you would also like this. It depends what your angles are. For me, true crime is really compelling, and I love kind of character development, and I think you get similar things out of both. And both have the heartbreak factor, both have kind of the horror, both have the serial killer element, and both have really compelling reading. So I would highly recommend. And then the last one that I think weirdly connects for me is Carrie by Stephen King. So I read Brother, then read Carrie, then read Post-Mortem. But obviously Brother I gave 5 stars and was like, wow. And I've very rarely had a situation where I have a 5-star and then a 5-star. So to get 3 5-stars in a row has basically never happened to me. So that's why I feel like they feel very interconnected in my head as well. But I've read, what have I read by Stephen King? I've read Misery by Stephen King. And I've read, he's like a vigilante situation. It was one of his more recent books, and it was more of a thriller than a horror. And I really enjoyed that one. And I really liked his writing in that. And then about 2 years ago or 18 months ago, I read Misery on holiday in Greece, and I really enjoyed that. So I've been tentatively, because I know Stephen King does a lot of horror, and I've been wanting to get into that genre in the last year quite a lot. I've been tentatively dipping my toe into horror and trying to gauge where I'm at with horror. I definitely don't ever think I'll be an extreme horror girly. But I wanted to gauge where my interest is. So I thought Carrie was a really good one. It's, nobody disputes it's a horror novel. It doesn't seem to be as scary and as intense as other Stephen Kings. I know Pet Sematary, The Shining, Salem's Lot are considered a lot scarier. So I thought this might be a good gateway. And I was completely bowled over by this book. I'm I'm still obsessed with this book. And I think this isn't even really one of his most highly rated books. So I find that's really interesting. Because for me now, I'm fascinated where I'm going to sit on the Stephen King spectrum. Because most people are like, yeah, Carrie's good, wasn't his best. But for me, this is just elite. So now I'm really confused where I'll be. But it's made me really excited, because if people don't think this is his best, then I might have so much more exciting reads to come. So I think he will be on future TBRs pretty soon, because I'm still buzzing from this book and I want my fix. So this follows Carrie White. So it's set in high school. And even the introduction, the first scene, is so vivid to me. It's not what you expect at all. They've done the Hollywood effect on the Carrie story, and when you look at some of the horror movies, they've got these very prom-esque girls, you know, blonde, very pretty, starring in this story. And I don't think it's done any justice for this story, because the first bit of the book, Stephen King talks about his experience at school, and he said that Carrie was based on a lot of girls he knew that were outsiders and through no fault of their own were victims of bullying. And he said, you know, I'm reckoning with the fact that at that age in my teenage life, I didn't really do much about it. I was an observer to it. So it's almost a love letter and an apology from Stephen to these people, the Carries of the world, who through no fault of their own, sometimes are shit on and bullied and taken the piss out of. And he's kind of mused on this idea of what happens if the Carries of the world had a little bit of power and they could actually do something about their situation, and they could make all those other people regret picking on them. And so it's a revenge plot. I think everybody knows it's a revenge plot, but it's really interesting because it's so nuanced, and I didn't expect that. So first of all, the actual action I did not expect. All I knew, which I think most people know, which is in the trailer, is that she, you know, she goes to prom and then pig's blood gets thrown on her. So I expected this to be more bloody and gory because of that, and that's not what this book is about. So there's a few misconceptions about this book. So I think if you've been interested, give it a read so that you can work through these misconceptions. So first of all, that is pretty much the only bloodbath scene in the kind of whole book. The violence and the horror is a bit more understated. That's what I would say. Secondly, this is written in like mixed media, which is never really advertised, which is such an exciting factor to it, and it really helps you run through the pages. But it's really interesting because it's a fiction, but it is trying to portray itself in that kind of fun way that authors like to do as a non-fiction. It's almost like a narrative non-fiction, and it's trying to be playful with news reports and science journals to try and verify this whole telekinesis thing as a legitimate, what happens if we took it seriously? What happens if this was a real condition? How would it be portrayed? So I loved that because it felt like a non-fiction a little bit, like it kind of legitimizes Carrie as a character, and you actually kind of feel like she was real. And thirdly, the depiction of the bullying for me is really nuanced, which is clever. So instead of having the very stereotypical victim, bad guys, this is what happens, there was a few characters in it who didn't sit right with the bullying, in a weird way tried to make amends, complicated, and the bullying itself is not black and white. Like the first scene is really visceral, that just sticks with me. And then the kind of prom scene, the last scene we get with Carrie is so interesting as well. Her interaction with other people, their interaction with her. I don't know how to describe it apart from it's one of those which I think all 3 books have, of this heartbreak effect, because it gives you so much hope and then it dashes it in all 3 stories for me. And it's heartbreaking, but I've never been moved so much by the 3 stories that I read back to back. And I think Brother and Carrie sit really well with this, because they both feel like they could be non-fictions, they could be real. And I know that sounds stupid because Carrie and this telekinesis thing is not real, but the way it's written, I could suspend disbelief. So yeah, as a trio, they had a really profound effect on me. So absolutely loved all of them. Have you read any of these books and enjoyed them yourself? I'd love to discuss that in the comments down below. But thank you guys so much if you've watched till the end, and I'll be back with a brand new video very soon. Bye now.